Chapter 1. Part 1. The room was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that calmed the mind, but the kind that pressed against your chest, heavy and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. Kai Reyes stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection, as if he were looking at someone he didn't recognize. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe properly. It was strange how a single day could change everything. How a decision that wasn't even his could completely alter the direction of his life. The suit he wore fit perfectly. Of course it did. Everything about today had been carefully planned, arranged down to the smallest detail. The fabric was expensive, the stitching precise, the white shirt beneath it crisp and untouched. Even the tie sat perfectly against his collar. Anyone who saw him now would think he looked exactly as a groom should, calm, composed, ready. But Kai knew the truth, because beneath all of that there was nothing. No excitement, no anticipation, no happiness, just emptiness. Behind him, the soft creak of the door broke the silence. He didn't need to turn. He already knew who it was. Kai. His mother's voice was gentle, too gentle. Kai's eyes shifted slightly, catching her reflection in the mirror. She stood just behind him, her hands clasped together, her expression filled with guilt. "It's fine, Mom," he said quietly. The words came out easily, too easily, but they weren't true. She stepped closer, placing her hands lightly on his shoulders. "You don't have to pretend," she whispered. "I'm not pretending." And that was the truth, because pretending meant there was something to hide, but there wasn't. This was reality. Simple, clear, unavoidable. Their family was falling apart. The company his father had spent his entire life building was collapsing under the weight of debt. Deals failed. Investors left. Loans piled up until there was no space left to breathe. Kai had watched it all happen quietly from the sidelines. He had seen the late nights, heard the tension, felt the heaviness in the house. Until the offer came. The Vale family, powerful, untouchable. They didn't offer help. They offered a solution, a merger, one that would save everything. But it came with a condition, a marriage. Kai. The realization settled slowly, but when he saw his father's exhausted face, he understood. This wasn't a choice. "I'm sorry," his mother whispered. "It's just a marriage," Kai replied, even though he knew it wasn't something small. The door opened again. "It's time." Kai took one last look at himself in the mirror. Then he turned and walked out. A decision made for survival. But at what cost? If you're already drawn into this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me, would you make the same choice? Let's continue. Chapter 1. Part 1. The room was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that calmed the mind, but the kind that pressed against your chest, heavy and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. Kai Reyes stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection, as if he were looking at someone he didn't recognize. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe properly. It was strange how a single day could change everything. How a decision that wasn't even his could completely alter the direction of his life. The suit he wore fit perfectly. Of course it did. Everything about today had been carefully planned, arranged down to the smallest detail. The fabric was expensive, the stitching precise, the white shirt beneath it crisp and untouched. Even the tie sat perfectly against his collar. Anyone who saw him now would think he looked exactly as a groom should, calm, composed, ready. But Kai knew the truth, because beneath all of that there was nothing. No excitement, no anticipation, no happiness, just emptiness. Behind him, the soft creak of the door broke the silence. He didn't need to turn. He already knew who it was. Kai. His mother's voice was gentle, too gentle. Kai's eyes shifted slightly, catching her reflection in the mirror. She stood just behind him, her hands clasped together, her expression filled with guilt. "It's fine, Mom," he said quietly. The words came out easily, too easily, but they weren't true. She stepped closer, placing her hands lightly on his shoulders. "You don't have to pretend," she whispered. "I'm not pretending." And that was the truth, because pretending meant there was something to hide, but there wasn't. This was reality. Simple, clear, unavoidable. Their family was falling apart. The company his father had spent his entire life building was collapsing under the weight of debt. Deals failed. Investors left. Loans piled up until there was no space left to breathe. Kai had watched it all happen quietly from the sidelines. He had seen the late nights, heard the tension, felt the heaviness in the house. Until the offer came. The Vale family, powerful, untouchable. They didn't offer help. They offered a solution, a merger, one that would save everything. But it came with a condition, a marriage. Kai, the realization settled slowly, but when he saw his father's exhausted face, he understood. This wasn't a choice. "I'm sorry," his mother whispered. "It's just a marriage," Kai replied, even though he knew it wasn't something small. The door opened again. "It's time." Kai took one last look at himself in the mirror. Then he turned and walked out. A decision made for survival. But at what cost? If you're already drawn into this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me, would you make the same choice? Let's continue. Chapter 1. Part 2. The moment Kai stepped into the hall, the atmosphere shifted. It was grand, filled with people dressed in quiet wealth and authority. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft golden glow across the room, reflecting off polished floors. Conversations filled the air, low and controlled, but none of them were about love. They were about business, influence, and gain. Kai could feel it immediately. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction. Every person in that room understood it, even if no one said it out loud. They smiled. They watched, but their eyes told the truth. Kai's steps were steady as he walked forward, even though each one felt heavier than the last. His gaze stayed ahead until he saw him. Adrian Vale stood at the altar like he belonged there, calm and completely in control. His suit was dark and perfectly tailored, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. When Kai reached him, their eyes met. There was nothing there. No curiosity, no warmth, no hesitation, just indifference. The officiant began to speak, but the words barely registered. They sounded distant, empty. Vows were spoken, promises made, but neither of them believed in them. When it was time to exchange rings, Kai lifted his hand. Adrian did the same. Their fingers brushed briefly, cold. Adrian's hand didn't react. It was steady, firm, unaffected. Kai slipped the ring onto his finger, and just like that, it was done. A quiet applause followed. Smiles appeared, but none of it felt real. This was supposed to be the beginning, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like something had already ended. After the ceremony, the guests returned to their conversations as if nothing important had happened. Deals were discussed, alliances strengthened. Kai stood slightly apart, watching it all from a distance. He didn't belong there, and he knew it. For a moment, his eyes met Adrian's across the room again, and once more there was nothing. Kai looked away first. This was his life now. A marriage without meaning, a connection without emotion, a role he had agreed to play. A wedding without love is only the beginning of something colder. But what happens when two strangers are forced to live together? Like, subscribe, and tell me, do you think Adrian truly doesn't care? Let's continue. Chapter 1. Part 3. The house was quiet when they arrived. Not just quiet, but empty in a way that felt unfamiliar. It was large and perfectly arranged, every detail in place, yet there was no warmth. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a space meant for appearances, not living. Kai stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the room. Everything looked expensive, controlled, untouched. Behind him, the door closed softly. Adrian walked past him without hesitation, removing his coat and handing it to the staff. His movements were smooth, practiced, effortless. Then he spoke. "You don't need to act like a husband." Kai turned slightly. Adrian's voice was calm, steady, and distant. "This marriage is for the families. Nothing more." The words were simple, but they settled heavily in the air. Kai held his gaze for a moment, waiting, but nothing else followed. "You'll have everything you need," Adrian continued. "A place to stay, financial support, privacy. Just don't interfere with my life." The meaning was clear. This wasn't a relationship. It was an arrangement. Kai exhaled quietly, his fingers tightening slightly, before relaxing. Understood. No argument. No hesitation. There was nothing to fight. Adrian watched him briefly, as if expecting something more, but when nothing came, he turned away. That's all. The conversation ended as quickly as it began. A staff member led Kai upstairs to a prepared room. It was spacious, clean, perfect, but it didn't feel like his. When the door closed, the silence returned. Kai sat on the edge of the bed, his hands resting loosely as he stared ahead. This was it. A house that didn't feel like home. A marriage that didn't feel real. A husband who didn't see him. He leaned back slowly, staring at the ceiling, waiting to feel something, anger, regret, anything, but there was only emptiness. Downstairs, Adrian stood by the window, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Kai crossed his mind. The way he didn't argue, didn't ask for anything. It didn't make sense. That wasn't how someone like him was supposed to act. Adrian frowned slightly, then dismissed the thought. It didn't matter. None of this mattered. And yet, for some reason, it lingered. A marriage built on silence can't stay quiet forever. Like, subscribe and tell me, do you think Adrian will start to notice him? Let's continue. Chapter 1. Part for the next morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and warm, but it did nothing to change the stillness in the room. Kai woke up slowly, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling for a moment, before reality settled back in. This wasn't his home. It never would be. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, before getting out of bed. Everything felt too calm, too controlled. Like even the air in this house followed strict rules. He got ready in silence, choosing simple clothes instead of anything expensive. When he stepped downstairs, the house was already awake, but not alive. Staff moved quietly, doing their jobs without unnecessary noise. Kai paused near the dining area, unsure if he should sit or leave. Adrian was already there, dressed perfectly as always. Calm, composed, distant. For a brief second, Kai considered turning around, but he didn't. He walked in. Adrian glanced up, his expression unchanged. "You're awake." Kai nodded slightly. "Yes." A short silence followed before Adrian spoke again. "You should inform the staff if you need anything. There's no reason to handle things yourself." Kai understood what that meant. Depend on this house. Depend on him. "I'm fine," Kai replied quietly. Adrian's gaze lingered on him for a moment, as if trying to read something he couldn't quite understand. "You don't need to act like this," he said. "You're already here." Kai met his eyes calmly. "I know." Another pause. Then Adrian looked away first. It was subtle, but it meant something. Breakfast continued in silence. The sound of cutlery was the only thing filling the space between them. Kai didn't try to speak again, and Adrian didn't seem interested in continuing the conversation. After a while, Kai stood. "I'll be leaving." That caught Adrian's attention. Leaving. For school. There was a brief shift in Adrian's expression, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. "You're still attending?" he asked. Kai nodded. "Yes." Adrian studied him for a moment, as if reevaluating something. Most people in Kai's position would have dropped everything, choosing comfort over responsibility. But Kai didn't. "Do what you want," Adrian said finally. Kai gave a small nod and turned to leave. As the door closed behind him, Adrian remained seated, his thoughts quieter than usual. Something didn't add up. This wasn't how someone who married for money behaved. And for the first time, Adrian didn't completely ignore that thought. Thought he understood everything about Kai. But the truth is only just beginning to show. Like, subscribe and tell me, why do you think Kai refuses to depend on him? Let's continue. Chapter 1. Part 5. The cafe was small, quiet, and easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. That was exactly why Kai chose it. It was far from the world he had just stepped into, far from the expectations, the silence, and the weight that came with his new life. Here, things were simple. Orders were taken, drinks were made, and no one asked questions that mattered. Kai tied his apron neatly, moving behind the counter with practiced ease. His hands worked automatically, preparing coffee, cleaning surfaces, keeping everything in order. There was comfort in this routine, something familiar he could hold on to. "Morning, Kai," one of his coworkers called. "Morning," he replied softly. No one here knew who he was. No one knew he was married, and that was how he wanted it. For a few hours, he could exist without being tied to a name that didn't feel like his. Back at the house, Adrian stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the city below. The morning had passed, but something about it lingered in his mind. Kai, the way he spoke, the way he refused to rely on anything given to him. It didn't match. It didn't fit the image Adrian had already created. A gold digger wouldn't act like that. A person who married for money wouldn't leave early for school, wouldn't reject comfort so easily. And yet Kai did. Adrian exhaled slowly, his expression tightening just slightly. It shouldn't matter. None of this should matter. But for some reason it did. Later that evening, Kai returned home quietly. The house was just as still as before, unchanged, untouched. He stepped inside, removing his shoes before walking further in. Adrian was in the living room, working, focused, as if nothing else existed. Kai paused for a brief moment before continuing past him. "Where were you?" Adrian asked without looking up. Kai stopped. "Out." A simple answer, but not enough. Adrian finally lifted his gaze. "Doing what?" Kai hesitated, just for a second. "School." Adrian watched him carefully, as if weighing the answer. Then he nodded slightly. "I see." Silence followed. Kai turned to leave, but Adrian spoke again. "You don't have to hide anything," he said. Kai's steps paused. For a moment, he considered responding, but instead he simply said, "I'm not hiding," and walked away. That night, the house remained quiet. Two people, under the same roof, living separate lives, thinking separate thoughts, but slowly, without realizing it, both beginning to notice something they hadn't expected. Each other. Two strangers, one house, and a silence that won't last forever. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me, who do you think will change first? And so, their story begins, not with love, but with distance. But sometimes, even the coldest beginnings can lead to something neither of them saw coming. Chapter 2, Part 1. Days passed, but nothing really changed. The house remained quiet, almost lifeless, as if it refused to acknowledge the presence of two people living inside it. Kai moved through it like a guest, careful, distant, never staying in one place for too long. Adrian, on the other hand, continued as if nothing in his life had shifted at all. Every morning followed the same pattern. Kai woke early, dressed simply, and left before the house fully came alive. Adrian noticed it without trying to. The soft sound of the door, the quiet footsteps, the absence that followed. At first, he ignored it. There was no reason to pay attention. But then it became routine, and routines were hard to overlook. One morning, Adrian came downstairs earlier than usual. The dining area was empty except for a neatly placed cup of tea that had already gone cold. He paused, his eyes resting on it longer than necessary. "He already left, sir," one of the staff informed him. Adrian gave a small nod, but his gaze didn't move immediately. "Left again? For what?" At the cafe, the atmosphere was completely different. Warm, alive, filled with quiet conversations and the steady rhythm of daily life. Kai moved behind the counter with ease, his hands working quickly, efficiently. Here, he didn't feel watched. He didn't feel judged. "2 coffees, Kai." "Coming." He worked without hesitation, pouring, mixing, handing over orders with a small, polite smile. It wasn't forced. It was natural. Something about this place allowed him to breathe. "Busy today," his coworker said. Kai nodded lightly. "It's good." And it was because here, he wasn't someone's husband. He was just Kai, back at the house. Adrian sat in his office, but his focus wasn't where it should have been. Documents lay open in front of him, numbers and contracts waiting for his attention, yet his mind drifted. It didn't make sense. Kai left every day, returned late, said little, asked for nothing. It didn't match the reason he was here. Adrian leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the desk. "Find out where he goes," he said calmly. The assistant standing nearby nodded. "Yes, sir." Adrian didn't question the decision. He simply accepted it. That evening, Kai returned home as usual, his movements quiet as he stepped inside. He wasn't expecting anything different. But Adrian was there, waiting, sitting in the living room, his presence impossible to ignore. Kai paused slightly before continuing forward. "You're late," Adrian said. Kai stopped. "I had things to do." "What things?" The question was direct. Too direct. Kai met his gaze, calm but guarded. "Does it matter?" Adrian's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in interest. "It might." Silence stretched between them. Kai looked away first. "It's nothing important." And with that, he moved past him. But this time, Adrian didn't let it go so easily. The more Kai tries to stay unnoticed, the more Adrian begins to pay attention. Like, subscribe, and tell me, what do you think Adrian will discover? Let's continue. Chapter 2, Part 2. The next morning, Adrian didn't wait for reports. He noticed it before anyone told him. The quiet sound of the door closing, the absence that followed. Kai had left again, earlier than expected, earlier than necessary. Adrian stood by the window, his gaze dropping to the driveway, just in time to catch a glimpse of him walking out alone. No driver, no escort, no hesitation, just gone. It didn't fit. By the time Adrian arrived at the office, the thought was still there, sitting quietly at the back of his mind, refusing to disappear. He went through his meetings, signed documents, listened to reports, but none of it fully held his attention. Something about it bothered him more than it should have. "Cancel my afternoon," he said suddenly. His assistant paused. "Sir, I have something to check." There was no explanation. There didn't need to be. Later that day, Adrian stood across the street from a small cafe. It was nothing like the places he was used to. No luxury, no status. Just a quiet space filled with soft conversations and the sound of cups clinking against tables. It was simple, ordinary, and inside, Kai. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly as he watched him move behind the counter. There was no hesitation in his actions, no awkwardness. Kai worked like he belonged there, like this wasn't something new, but something familiar, something routine. "2 coffees," a customer said. Kai nodded. "Coming." His voice was calm, natural, completely different from the quiet, distant tone he used at home. Adrian noticed everything. The way Kai moved quickly but carefully, the way he listened when people spoke, the way he gave small, polite smiles that didn't feel forced. Then something unexpected happened. Kai laughed, softly, briefly, but it was real. Adrian stilled. That was the first time he had seen that. Not the calm, controlled version of Kai, But this. Someone lighter. Someone comfortable. Adrian didn't move, didn't step inside, didn't call out to him. He simply stood there, watching longer than he intended to. And the more he watched, the less things made sense. A gold digger wouldn't work like that. Wouldn't choose this over comfort. Wouldn't hide it. Adrian exhaled slowly, his expression tightening just slightly. So that's what you've been doing. There was no anger in his voice, only something quieter, something unfamiliar. After a moment, he turned and walked away. No confrontation, no questions. But the thought didn't leave. Because for the first time, Adrian realized something he hadn't considered before. Maybe he had been wrong. The truth doesn't always reveal itself all at once. Sometimes it begins with a single moment that changes everything. Like, subscribe and tell me, what do you think Adrian is starting to realize? Let's continue. Chapter 2, Part 3. That evening, Kai returned home later than usual. The sky had already darkened, and the lights inside the house were on, steady and quiet like always. He stepped inside, removing his shoes without making a sound. Nothing seemed different at first, but it was. Adrian was in the living room, not working, not distracted, waiting. Kai paused for a brief moment before continuing forward, his expression calm, though something in his chest tightened slightly. "You're late," Adrian said. His voice was even, but there was something beneath it this time. Not irritation, not quite. Attention. Kai stopped. "I had things to do." Adrian's gaze didn't leave him. "At a cafe?" The words landed directly. Kai's fingers curled slightly at his side. That was all the reaction he gave, but it was enough. So he knows. Kai let out a slow breath. Yes. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they had shared before. Adrian stood this time, moving a step closer. "You're working there." It wasn't a question. Kai didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why?" The question came immediately. No accusation, no anger, just confusion. Kai met his gaze, steady but guarded. "Because I want to." Adrian frowned slightly. "You don't need to." "I know." That answer lingered. For a moment, Adrian didn't speak. He studied Kai like he was trying to understand something that refused to make sense. "Then why?" he asked again, quieter this time. Kai held his gaze, not looking away. "Because I don't want to depend on something that isn't real." The words settled between them, clear, unavoidable. Adrian's expression changed, just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough. "Is that what you think this is?" he asked. Kai didn't hesitate. Yes. There was no hesitation, no softening, just truth. Adrian's jaw tightened faintly, but he didn't argue. He couldn't, because part of him knew. Kai wasn't wrong. The silence stretched longer this time, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt tense, like something had shifted without either of them fully understanding how. Finally, Adrian spoke again. "You should have told me." Kai blinked once, caught off guard for just a second. "Why?" "So I would know." The answer was simple, but it carried something unfamiliar. Kai searched his face briefly, as if trying to find meaning behind the words. But Adrian had already returned to his usual calm expression. "There's nothing to know," Kai said quietly. "It doesn't change anything." Adrian didn't respond immediately, because for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was true. Kai turned to leave, taking a step toward the stairs. "Wait." The word stopped him. Kai didn't turn back right away. "What?" Adrian hesitated. It was brief, almost invisible, but it was there. "Nothing," he said finally. Kai didn't question it. He simply nodded once and walked away. Adrian remained where he stood, his gaze lingering on the empty space Kai had left behind. Something about that conversation stayed with him. The way Kai spoke, the way he didn't hesitate, the way he refused everything Adrian thought he wanted. It didn't fit. It didn't match the image Adrian had created from the beginning, and that was starting to bother him. Upstairs, Kai closed his door quietly, leaning against it for a moment as he let out a slow breath. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected Adrian to find out, and he definitely hadn't expected him to ask why. Kai looked down at his hands, his expression softening just slightly. "It doesn't matter," he murmured, but for some reason it felt like it did. The more they try to stay distant, the more their worlds begin to collide. Like, subscribe and tell me, do you think Adrian is starting to understand Kai, or just getting more confused? Let's continue. Chapter 2. Part for the days after that conversation didn't return to normal. Not completely. On the surface, everything stayed the same. Kai still left early. Adrian still worked late. The house remained quiet, structured, untouched. But beneath that, something had shifted. Adrian noticed it first. Not in obvious ways, but in small things. The sound of Kai's footsteps in the morning no longer went ignored. The way he avoided eye contact at the table felt deliberate now, not natural. Even the silence between them felt different, heavier, like it carried something unsaid. Adrian found himself watching more, paying attention, and that alone was enough to change everything. That evening, Kai returned home later than usual. The door opened quietly, but Adrian heard it. He was in the living room again, not working this time, just sitting, his gaze lifting slightly as Kai stepped inside. Kai didn't notice at first. He moved like he always did, careful, quiet, trying not to disturb anything. But something was off. His steps were slower, less steady. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're late," he said. Kai nodded faintly. Work was busy. His voice was softer than usual, weaker. Adrian stood. This time, he didn't stay where he was. He moved closer. "You don't look fine." Kai gave a small shake of his head. "I'm okay." But even as he said it, his balance shifted slightly, just enough to notice. And Adrian did. Before Kai could take another step, he stumbled. It wasn't dramatic, just a brief loss of balance. But Adrian reacted instantly. His hand reached out, catching Kai by the arm before he could fall. For a moment, everything stilled. Kai froze slightly, his breath catching as he steadied himself. Adrian's grip was firm, warm, too close. "You're not okay," Adrian said, his voice lower now. Kai pulled back gently, creating distance again. "It's just a headache." Adrian didn't move, didn't let the moment go so easily. "You're lying." The words weren't harsh. They were certain. Kai looked at him, a hint of frustration flickering across his expression. "I said I'm fine." But his voice betrayed him. It wasn't steady anymore. Adrian's gaze lingered on him, sharper now, more focused. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. Kai hesitated. Then slowly he shook his head. "I don't need." "You're not in a position to argue." The interruption was quiet, controlled, but firm. Kai went silent, not because he agreed, but because he didn't have the energy to continue. After a moment, he exhaled softly and sat down. Adrian watched him carefully, noticing things he hadn't before. The slight flush on his skin, the way his breathing wasn't as even as usual, the tension in his posture. It was subtle, but clear. "You should have stayed home," Adrian said. Kai let out a quiet breath. "I can't." "Why?" The question came again. But this time, it wasn't about curiosity. It was something else. Kai closed his eyes briefly before answering. "Because I need to work." Adrian frowned slightly. "You don't need to." "I do." The answer was immediate and final. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with something neither of them had defined yet. Adrian turned slightly. "Wait here." Kai didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. For the first time, Adrian didn't walk away from the situation. He stepped into it. Sometimes, the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths. And this might be the first time Adrian chooses not to look away. Like, subscribe and tell me, Do you think this is where everything starts to change? Let's continue. Chapter 2, Part 5. Adrian didn't take long. When he returned, he carried a glass of water, a small box of medicine, and a cold cloth. His movements were steady, controlled, but there was something different in the way he approached this time. Not distant, not detached, present. Kai looked up slightly as Adrian stepped closer. "You don't have to be quiet," Adrian said softly, not harsh, just firm. Kai stopped, not because he wanted to listen, but because he didn't have the strength to argue. Adrian placed the glass on the table, then reached forward, pressing the cold cloth gently against Kai's forehead. Kai flinched slightly at the sudden contact. "It's cold," he murmured. "That's the point." The response was simple, but it carried something unfamiliar: care. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Kai sat still, his eyes half-lidded, his breathing uneven as he tried to ignore the discomfort spreading through his body. Adrian remained close, watching him carefully, more focused than he had ever been before. "You're running a fever," Adrian said. Kai let out a quiet breath. "It'll pass. You've been overworking yourself." Kai didn't respond. Because it was true, Adrian's gaze didn't leave him. "You went to work like this." Kai hesitated, then nodded faintly. Adrian frowned, something tightening in his expression. "That's reckless." Kai gave a weak shake of his head. "It's necessary." The words were soft, but stubborn. Adrian exhaled slowly, as if trying to understand something that refused to make sense. "You keep saying that," he said. "Necessary for what?" Kai didn't answer immediately. His eyes shifted slightly, avoiding Adrian's gaze. "For myself." That was all he said. Adrian went quiet, because that answer wasn't something he expected. For a brief moment, the room fell into silence again. But it didn't feel cold. It felt uncertain. Kai shifted slightly, his balance faltering again as the dizziness returned. Before he could steady himself, his hand moved instinctively, gripping onto the nearest thing. Adrian's sleeve. Both of them froze. Kai's fingers tightened slightly, his grip weak, but enough to hold on. For a second, it felt like he might pull away, like he might apologize. But he didn't. And Adrian didn't move either. He didn't pull away, didn't step back, didn't break the contact. Instead, he stayed. His gaze dropped briefly to Kai's hand, then back to his face. "Rest," Adrian said quietly. Kai's grip loosened slowly, but not completely. "I will." Adrian adjusted the cloth again, more carefully this time. Slower, gentler, and for the first time since their marriage, the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt like something had changed, even if neither of them understood it yet. Sometimes, the first sign of change isn't loud. It's quiet, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. Like, subscribe, and tell me, was this the moment Adrian started to care? If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Narites, where love is never simple.